This is the School Success Podcast, a podcast for school leaders to learn from other school leaders what's working and what's not, and to get inspiration and encouragement, as well as strategies to grow school enrollment, connect with families, retain teachers, recruit teachers, and everything in between. You guys are heroes, and I cannot thank you enough for pouring into this next generation that's coming behind us. My goal is you will take at least one thing away from every episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Please enjoy the School Success Podcast.
Time for school.
Hey, School Success Makers. Welcome to another edition of the School Success Podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Slater, joined by one of my friends, David Wells, out of the great state of Massachusetts, and he is the executive consultant, co-founder, and principal of Global School Consulting Group. He's an awesome guy. He's been doing this for a very long time, helping schools, and he knows a lot. So when I was like, I got to have him on because I have questions for him, and I've seen firsthand some of the people what he knows, but also the things he's helped articulate and push out to make better. And I was like, well, let's dive into that and learn from him together. But before we do all of that, I, of course, always pass it off to my guests to introduce themselves. So, David, welcome to the podcast today, sir.
Thank you very much, Mitchell. It's great to be with you, and I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to share about some of the areas about which we have passion in terms of educational opportunities around the world.
Love it. It's going to be fun. And I always start with the same fun question. If I was to visit where you are in Massachusetts, where you live, what would you say, Mitchell, you got to eat this and do this? What would you say I have to do?
Well, I'm no expert. We live in it's northwestern Massachusetts, but we've just relocated here from South America. So I'm still learning, and I would only be able to direct you to my son's organic dairy farm next door and encourage you to buy a cut of beef or some fresh chicken or purchase some of his cheese that he makes. He's a cheesemaker. Other than that, I'm still learning.
Okay. Well, that sounds delicious. I'll sign up for that. Yeah. I love that fresh stuff. It's way better than the farm GMO stuff that is all over the store.
For sure.
So
for sure.
That's awesome. Well, hey, tell me a little bit about Global Consulting Group and what you guys are doing, and then we'll kind of dive into some of the questions I have for you.
Sure. The Global School Consulting Group is an affiliate group of 24 consultants. Many of us work primarily outside of the U.S. Some work within the U.S., some work directly with public schools, public school systems, others with private schools. Some work exclusively or partially with Christian schools and the Christian school community. My work is almost entirely international, and I work about 50-50 with secular international schools and then with Christian schools, including some bilingual schools in different countries. But we've been at it for a number of years as a group. We've been affiliated now for 6 years, but many of us have been consulting much longer than that.
Love it. Well, you talked about international. I know it's a big piece of your organization and what you guys do. What would you say, and this is just kind of like me learning from you naturally as we were having this conversation, but what would you say is the biggest difference between U.S. schools and international schools that are just in other countries? What are they're being taught and how it's being taught? Is it extremely different, or is there a lot of correlation between the two?
Yeah, good question. When we're looking at the international schools, the schools that are not teaching a specific national curriculum and in the host country, the content and many of the strategies of instruction and learning are very similar to what they would be in strong schools in the U.S. The fundamental difference, I believe, in terms of the typical school in the U.S. and the typical international school is that real focus on international mindedness. It's often referred to. The idea of thinking outside of a particular national or ethnic mentality. And I'm not suggesting that that doesn't happen in many schools in the U.S. I'm sure that it does. I certainly hope that it does, although I don't work with schools in the U.S. To any extent. But that idea that there really is an intentionality to seeking a broader understanding beyond a particular worldview or nationalistic perspective. And that's an enriching aspect of international education. And one of the reasons why there is a movement there are many more international schools within the US now, schools that are really focusing to get kids thinking outside of a national or an ethnic lens and to broaden their worldview and their understanding of how we all relate to one another globally.
Are the schools internationally having some of the same troubles that U.S. schools are having in terms of teacher recruitment, teacher retention, making sure filling empty seats? Is that kind of this? Does that cross over into other countries that they're having that same issue?
Well, on the filling empty seats, not so much. Internationally, globally, the independent school movement is on fire. It's just growing exponentially. The latest statistics I've seen is that the number of international schools around the globe doubles every 10 years. So the market is expanding. What's really interesting is that with international schools, roughly 80% of the kids in international schools are home country nationals. So it's not that they're serving primarily internationals, it's that their program and their curriculum is international. So the demand for education internationally, and this is true in all segments. It's true in the Christian school movement. It's true in the secular school movement. There are a lot of other faith-based school environments around the world in which there's an exponential growth in terms of demand and interest. On the staffing side, yes, there's a challenge in filling positions with competent, qualified individuals, and that's compounded at the leadership level. There's a real dearth of qualified, committed, capable, experienced leaders for the schools. That's a constant struggle. And with the Christian schools we work with, even more so than in the secular school world, a real shortage of that high profile quality leadership for our schools.
Hey, school success makers, just a really quick break from the episode to highlight our amazing sponsors over at America's Christian Credit Union. They are celebrating 65 years of service this year, and they provide essential school banking services and a tuition financing program for schools looking to reduce their risk and administrative burden. And you guys can find out all about them on their website, americaschristianceu.com/schools. That's americaschristianceu.com/schools. They are amazing over there, and I always like to say, if you're a school that collects tuition and you have a hard time collecting all of tuition at the end of the year, maybe it comes around May, June, you're like, man, we only got collected 95 or 98% of what tuition was owed to our school. One of the things you can do is have your parents get a tuition financing loan through the credit union, and then they pay the credit union directly, and you get your funds up front at the beginning of the year as the school. So you don't have to chase people throughout the year, and you can focus on what you do best, and that is loving and educating your students. And it doesn't cost your school anything to do it. So check them out online, americaschristianceu.com/schools. All right, back to the show. What's one of the biggest needs of the schools you work with? So like, and that could be obviously US, because I know your whole organization works with schools all over, but what's one of the biggest ones that keeps coming up that people are just not good at it? Maybe it's board governance, maybe it's strategic planning, maybe fundraising, marketing. Like what is it that keeps coming up and you're like, man, if schools could just hone in and fix this one thing, man, they're going to be they're in good shape.
Well, the problem is a lot of times what schools are looking for isn't necessarily what they need. Sometimes Sometimes they don't necessarily identify what the real need is. And so we try to emphasize doing organizational assessments, school assessments, where we look at the broad picture of what the school is doing and try to identify areas in which we can come alongside and support them. But the greatest demand that I've seen globally for our services since the pandemic are related to strategic planning. Schools have come through the survival mode, many of them, and now it's a question of what comes next. Where are we going? What are we going to look like in 10 years, in 15 years, in 20 years? It's really interesting. I'm working with a school right now in St. Petersburg in Russia, and of course they're suffering on their side of the conflict there that their government has with Ukraine. And I was speaking with one of the principals, and she said, I can't even plan for next Monday, let alone for 5 years from now. But the school board and the executive leadership of the school is engaged in long-range strategic planning. It's just, it's on the radar now for many schools that have come out of the COVID era and are looking to see what's next. Another area, and many schools, especially in the smaller schools, are not recognizing yet, but the whole issue of technology has come to the forefront. And many would say, well, yeah, we solved a lot of the technology challenges and we've expanded what we do with educational technology in our schools because we were forced to, coming through COVID and so forth. But the new frontiers that are constantly presented through technology, schools have to stay ahead of those, and most are not. Many are not, and certainly the artificial intelligence is a big piece of that. And there are schools that are still reacting and trying to cope, and now many schools are seeking to really be proactive in terms of how they're going to use that sort of new frontier in technology, but that's big as well. There's always a need for governance work, whether it's acknowledged or not. Many schools are not reaching their potential because they're not governed well. That's a constant.
And is that common for? I'm guessing you guys do more work with private schools than public schools, I would assume. But is it the same? Like when you come in to assess and to help fix, is it kind of the same when it comes to this private school or this private Christian school or this public charter school? Is it kind of the same in this how you fix it?
A lot of the same challenges, yes. And we do not have anyone working in governance in the public school and the public sector in the U.S. Or anywhere, I guess. But certainly within the private sector and the charter school sector, the distinctions in terms of the dysfunctions or the areas of challenge or needed growth tend to come within that private sector, the non-public sector, tend to be differentiated by the type of ownership. So in the sort of U.S. model of not-for-profit schools, there's one sort of constellation of challenges and needs of those boards. Where there isn't an actual specific ownership interest or engagement with ownership beyond whatever the assembly or association or foundation or whatever that owns the school. However, the other schools, whether they be church-owned or mission-owned or now huge growth in the area of proprietary schools, what are often now referred to as owned schools, which include corporate investor, individuals, families, partnerships. I see, and actually internationally, the schools that are coming into the accreditation world internationally, at least 3/4 of the new schools coming in are owned schools. the U.S. model is not being replicated any longer to a great extent internationally. And now that's also happening with the Christian schools. Actually, I have a meeting next week with an individual who is talking with us about a group that's interested in starting a chain of international Christian schools that are investor owned. There are currently several chains of Christian schools around the world that are not for profits or mission owned. But this is a group that's looking at the business model of using the ministry of a Christian school as they're fitting into their business model. Very interesting. So the needs of owned schools is very different than the needs of the not-for-profits. But a church-owned school, including those in the States, I worked at for a period of time with a church-owned school in the States. They tend to have this more issues in governance similar to the owned schools. You have a principal pastor or a lead pastor, or the elders of a church that have ownership mentality that are overseeing the work of a board for a school, and that tends to reflect greater what we see with our own schools, where it's a founder investor with their interests, and it's mainly because of the interest they have, what they expect to get out of their school. So we work on both sides. My specialty is more working with the owned schools, and that's where I spend a lot of my time.
Does the own school model, do you think that works in the United States, specifically for, let's say, a Christian school? Because I haven't heard of that as often, but like an owned Christian school in the United States, is that common and can that work?
Well, I don't know the current statistics, but in the ACI size statistics, when I was working in the States for a period of time about 20 years ago, the majority of ACSI schools in the United States were owned by churches. Some of them were separately incorporated, but they were still owned by a church, often with shared facility, often with senior pastors having a oversized impact on the operation of the school. I don't believe that's changed. And I know from some of my colleagues that have worked in those types of schools that their dynamic is very similar to the proprietor type of challenge. I don't know of many Christian schools that are privately owned in the US. That's exploding internationally. I work with a lot of Christians in Latin America, where I do quite a bit of my work, that are Christian individuals and families that have started schools that is their family business, and it's also their ministry as a family. And it's a very viable model if it's done right. Whether that would take off in the States, I don't know. I don't know the particulars of that. There's huge advantages in the U.S. to not-for-profit status, of course. But if it's your business, then it's hard to make more than a salary if you're operating as a not-for-profit. What we see internationally is a lot of investors who own the infrastructure, and then their school is a not-for-profit. And I could see that as very functional in the U.S., where the school is leasing from an investor or the founder who still owns the infrastructure but is not going to operate the school. But again, I don't see that as being a significant impact on Christian schools in the U.S. But the church-owned school absolutely is. And it can be very effective ministry and schooling, or it can be incredibly dysfunctional.
Would you
Sorry.
say that no, this is good. I thought about privately owned Christian schools like a month ago here in the US, and I go, well, I feel like it would be not common to do because of the people who would want to donate now don't get a tax write-off. And I feel like that would make people not want to give. Is that true, that would be like something that's hard to get donations and fundraising going with a for-profit school?
Yeah, absolutely. There are situations in which a separate entity, which is a not-for-profit that exists for a purpose that's compatible with the school, could be a conduit um, for donation, but it would have to be done right in order to be legally acceptable. But yeah, that would absolutely be an issue. But it does open the door to investor engagement. Investors either that are looking for a return on their investment, or investors who have a real significant interest in the success of the school.
Hmm.
But I don't know of examples that I can say of that being implemented in the U.S. I could give you dozens of examples internationally.
Hey, school success makers, just a really quick break to highlight one of our amazing sponsors, and that is ClassReach. Now, ClassReach supports schools of all sizes from application to graduation. Take charge of your school with ease, power, and mobility using ClassReach, the school management software administrators and teachers love using. You can get your free demo at classreach.com. That's classreach.com. They are amazing people, and they provide this amazing SIS software for you to keep track of your students' grades, communicating with families that are enrolled, and a whole bunch more. So again, check it all out on their website, classreach.com. They are awesome. All right, now back to the show. Okay. Wow. Okay. Very cool. Well,
Mhm,
okay. So if the
mhm.
school's listening, let's do a couple scenarios real quick, and we'll say school's listening and they're just about to start or they're in the process of starting. What would be some like advice you'd give them as they're starting a school, and then somebody else on this other side who has an existing school? If you were to tell them to like kind of look at something like, hey, I would focus on
Yeah.
this. So to startup and not startup, what would be some of the advice you'd give for them too?
Well, my advice would, be somewhat different, but the theme would be exactly the same, and that is start with mission. Um, it has to be missional. Know why you exist, have a clarity of purpose, and then be intentional in making sure that the way you operate is aligned with that mission. And in the case of a school that's operating, I would say go back to the mission, take a hard look at the mission, and see whether you're operating in congruence with your mission. Um, there's a phrase that I like to use, which is that you have mission fidelity, that you operate in fidelity with your mission. And I'm really concerned, although I don't know a lot of Christian schools in the U.S. Operationally, nor do I know many of the independent schools, but I'm concerned about the mad dash that we're seeing in many states in the US of families from public education into private education, and specifically Christian education. And I was meeting recently with a group that is they were starting at the time. Now they're in their first year of operating a Christian school here in Massachusetts. And when I heard their initial presentation before they opened, it was all about we need to get our kids out of the public school, or our kids are being homeschooled and they aren't receiving the quality that we want them to have. So in order to get them away from what's not working, we're going to do Christian education. And my comment after that presentation to them privately was, don't don't focus on what you're escaping from. Focus on what's worth coming to, and that's mission. That's your value proposition. What do you offer in the marketplace? Because frankly, a lot of these families that are shifting into private Christian schools today, when things calm down in the public sector, when the social realities start to settle back into a more functional perspective, if they do, they'll be gone. I mean, I worked summers in Boston when I was a kid, a teenager, and it was during the time when the public schools were going through desegregation. And I remember listening to some people in the local Christian school talking about how they were having such an influx of students that were coming into their suburban Boston um, Christian school. And the excitement and, oh, we've got to build, we've got to grow, we've got to expand. Well, that lasted for a season. But those families were not going to that school because of what the school was. They were going to the school to get away from what they didn't like that was happening in the public sector. And when that sort of settled, when the edge came off of that, then they were gone for the most part. And so people should be coming to our schools because of our mission, and we should be operating our schools according to our mission. And I've been involved with a group that's called On Mission Diagnostics, and we actually we have an instrument that we use with schools to do an assessment as to whether they're operating in mission fidelity, whether their operations actually are reflective of their mission, and avoiding that mission drift or that mission gap, whatever the terminology is being used. So that's where I would start, and I would always start there, whether it's a new school or whether it's an existing school. Clarity of purpose, intentionality, and knowing what you intend to accomplish, and then making sure that that's being accomplished, and remaining committed to your fundamental values, why it is that you exist. That's where I'd start with both of them.
That's huge, and I love that so much too, David. Because when we were talking to some schools that we work with, they were saying, I remember talking with some of them. They go, "Man, we're bursting at the seams. COVID sent all these people to us because they were fed up with the lockdowns or masks, whatever
Exactly.
it was, And so
Mhm.
they have all these kids, and they go, let's start building this multi-million-dollar facility." And I just got super nervous with that, of hearing more and
Yeah.
more stories of churches. It's exciting, yes, and I don't want to be the Debbie Downer, but I just got worried to go, what if those people go back? And because I think that's natural human tendency. We get flared up and upset about something, whether it's a presidential election, we get upset and then we calm down. We get upset about a church decision, we go calm down. A friend makes us mad. Week later, it goes down, and so eventually, those people, like you said, they're going to go, it's not that bad. It's natural because you've heard it now from work, you've heard about it from school, you've heard it in the media, and it's just now it's
Mhm.
commonplace. And so, yes,
Yeah.
I 100% agree, and
Yeah.
I think there's going to be people losing buildings. Unfortunately, I think there's going to be
Yeah.
things that are going to be happening because of
But
schools overextending themselves.
but and you have that caution. I have that caution. I don't think either of us are saying, well, sit back and wait, they're going to leave. But what it must spur us to do then is to really clarify and get really good at doing what we say we're here for, accomplishing our purpose, having our impact, and then win those people. Convince them through the way that we operate, through the success that we have with their children, through our fidelity to who we say we are, turn them into what sometimes in the governance world we refer to as moral owners of the school. Um, a family that's escaping from something or mad at their local public school or even at another private school, capture them, convince them of the value of what your value proposition is, so that then they become part of that moral owner group, those who are really sold on your school. There's actually a model of governance now that came out of a group in Australia that's aligned with Christian schools, and they call it community governance. But their primary focus, the premise behind their approach to governance, is to grow the percentage of moral owners in the school, those who are fully aligned with the purpose, the values, the impact of the school. And so if those families are there, and the families may be only thinking for a season, then get a hold of them, convert them. And I don't mean that in a spiritual, relational sense, but convert them to that mission of your school. It's a great opportunity.
It's huge, and it's something when I've talked with schools, they'll have these, whether they're a Montessori school, classical Christian school, or just a Christian school. You have different things about your school that's very foundational about who you are as a school. And I've talked to these schools. They go, well, we start losing them when they get to high school because we don't have prom and we don't have these things that the kids want. And I said, Okay, but are you actively throughout the year meeting and talking with these families to make sure they understand why it's important for them to continue and finish throughout the K-12 or throughout high school? And every one of them has told me, no, we don't do that. When they say they're leaving, we try and meet with them and see why. And I said, well, you're too late at that point. I said, it's got to be, you've got to be talking to them throughout the year and let them know this is why your kid is here, because we're trying to do this and this is the end goal. And I just feel like schools are not doing a super good job at doing that part. Would you agree?
Um, Again, I don't have a front row seat with the schools in the U.S., but I would say in general, yes, that you're spot on. Um, and not only that, um, being clear and repetitive and direct with our expressions of the value proposition, what we're committed to and what we're seeking to accomplish, and then showing evidence of actually accomplishing it. But we do need to be, as educators, strategic as well in meeting the needs of our constituents, of our consumers. Because I mentioned moral owners, but everyone's not a moral owner, but they're consumers. For some reason, they're paying for the service that you're providing. And so we need to know what they need and what is of greatest interest, and then be strategic in providing what we possibly can provide in order to respond to those needs. I was involved in leading a project of starting a high school in the U.S. A number of years ago, and we knew initially our size would not permit for all of the bells and whistles. And so we made some really significant decisions. And that was one was in the curricular area. It was going to be very narrow, but it was going to be very, very challenging. That we were going to offer and require substantial academic attainment performance. That was central. So we weren't going to be offering a lot of electives. So we were going to prove we were really good, and we we're going to be very successful in the core areas, and particularly in that area, the science and math was very important to us. And in the extracurriculars, what give the identity, the kids' sense of belonging in their school and so forth, we committed to a narrow band in the fine arts, performing arts, and in athletics. And in those early years, for example, a soccer team, to have 11 or 12 or 13 kids on the team meant, okay, all hands on deck. We need all of you in order to have this team. But we were able to build an identity for the students of belonging because of the performing arts and because of the athletics, even though we were tiny. I forget now, I think we had 15 in our first class. So that was strategic. Obviously, what we did with athletics, what we did in the performing arts, what we did in our academic program was aligned with our purpose, and we sought to be faithful in the way that we did those in order to contribute to our purpose, without question. But emphasizing those areas was strategic. It was to give the kids identity, belonging, and success when they graduated, because those first timers, if they weren't successful in university, that was going to destroy any credibility that we had. So strategic, not just, hoping that because we do things for the right reasons, everything is going to come out well. That's not going to bring us the kind of success that we need in our schools.
Yeah, hard to build up on top of that for sure.
Hmm.
If you were to share, David, one final piece of advice before we close it out today, one final piece of advice for the school leaders listening, what would you say? If there was one more piece you had to share, what would you share?
I've been working a lot lately around three different ideas within the way our schools operate. And one is that we be relevant. And by that, I mean that we know who we're serving and that we be meeting their needs. So there's this sort of dynamic of demand and the need, and making sure that what we offer is what people really need. And if they aren't seeking it out, that we help them understand that need, but also the viability and sustainability. I used to hear when I was running schools, "Oh, you run this school like a business." Well, let me tell you a secret. Our schools are a business. And unless we develop a business plan where we're viable and sustainable, then we may go ride the wave today because COVID chased people away from repressive environments, and because the social environment today is making families afraid of their public schools. You can ride that wave today, but unless you have a sustainable and a viable model for your operation of your school, you're going to find yourselves with empty rooms, empty buildings, and lack of opportunity to minister and to serve students. So I would really encourage that there be focus on, and it all goes back to the mission, and it goes back to that value proposition. What do we offer? Make sure that it's responding to a need, a real need, and that we build a structure, we build our business plan in a way that's going to be viable and sustainable. And I'm excited. I see schools. I did a board training actually at a school here in the U.S. that has been in operation for over 100 years. I was with them during the summer. I'm thinking sustainable Christian education. Their viability was challenged during COVID, but they have found that model, and they're moving forward with that model. It's exciting to see that over the years.
That's awesome. Well, man, David, I love it. If anybody's listening and they want to get in touch with you or your team, what's the best way for them to do that?
If you reach out to me, I can connect you with anyone on our team. It's daw@globalscg.org. But if that's too complicated, just look up Global School Consulting Group online, and it'll take you to us.
That's awesome. Cool. David, thank you for your time today. Thank you for the years you've poured into education and helping schools all over the world be able to pour into their students better. I love what you're doing. I'm wishing you nothing but the best as you continue to do what you're doing with your group. All right. But thank you for being on today.
Great. Thank you, Mitchell. Really appreciate this opportunity.
Well, another huge shout out and a thank you to David for taking time and being on the podcast today. I love this interview. You can tell this guy has been in the school and education space for a long time. He knows a lot, and he loves schools. He loves helping to make them better. So as always, I'm hoping you were able to learn at least one thing from today's episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. It's what this podcast is for. It's why we started it. We want to learn from you as well as you learn from us and the guests that we have on this podcast. So we hope that that is happening. And as always, I mention every episode that we have 3 free resources for you guys. And the first one is, of course, the School Success Podcast that you're listening to right now. We want to make sure you're listening every single week as we drop new episodes on Mondays. Learn from our guests and learn from the different episodes that we put out there. But that is a free resource for you guys. So if you're loving it, we would love a 5-star review, as well as for you to share it with other educators and friends of yours that are in the education school space. That would mean a lot to us, a lot to me. There's a lot of work and time that goes into putting out the podcast. So that would mean a lot to us. So appreciate you sending that out to your friends and colleagues. And then the second free resource is our School Success Makers community on Facebook. If you're not yet in there, we want to make sure you join that. I'm personally in there. I'd love to see you in there as well. Feel free to ask questions to the other members of the group. It's completely free. So just go over there and join that private Facebook community, School Success Makers. And the last one, I want to make sure you guys are not missing out on our weekly email that goes out each week. It's called the School Success Report. You can sign up for that on our website, schoolsuccessmakers.com. In the top right-hand corner, you'll see the button School Success Report. Click that, enter your email. Make sure you're not missing out on that. We're highlighting different teachers. We've written custom articles that we are just trying to pour into the community, into the school community, the education community, to make you guys better. And if there's any thoughts or any ideas or anything that you guys can give us feedback wise, please let us know. You can do that through our website as well, schoolsuccessmakers.com. We're always trying to get better. We're always trying to find better, more people that we can have on the podcast to interview and to learn from. So if you have any of those suggestions, or if you are one of those that you think should be on the podcast, you can message us through the website as well. All right. That was a pretty long outro. So I hope that was good for you guys. And I hope you guys are doing awesome and you're having a great week. And we'll be back here next week with another awesome episode as usual on the School Success Podcast. We'll see you then.